So good morning or buongiorno or good evening, buonasera, depending on where you are in the world right now. My name is Tom Gerri and I'm the Vice President of Partnerships for Capital Daily, an independent local journalism outlet in Victoria, British Columbia, on Vancouver Island on Canada's west coast. Capital Daily is proud to sponsor this special edition of Ideas and Impact, all the way from the OECD International Conference on SMEs and the Urban Fabric in the small city of Trento in northern Italy. Italy was the last country me and my family visited prior to the pandemic, and I haven't been out of Canada since, so it's wonderful to be back, at least virtually. Capital Daily and our parent company, Overstory Media Group, is a new way to inform, empower, and connect citizens through trusted news and insights about the coveted regions that they call home. It's a community resource for a city with a shortage of independent, trusted, investigative, and accessible community journalism. And through an email daily newsletter, website, and event series, Capital Daily is committed to rebuilding a local, independent news ecosystem in Victoria and on Vancouver Island by focusing on the content that delivers the right information to our audience, where they spend most of their time in their email inbox, first thing. If you'd like to keep up to date on one of North America's coolest small cities, so you'll be a plugged in local when you do come visit us eventually, sign up for our daily newsletter at capitaldaily.ca. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Gerri Sinclair. Gerri is the Innovation Commissioner for the province of British Columbia. In this role, she's a champion for technology and innovation, facilitating partnership and promoting innovation across all sectors of the economy, both in British Columbia and in Canada. Welcome, Gerri.
Well, thanks very much, Tom, and buongiorno to those of you in the Pacific time zone, and buonasera to those of you and us here in Italy. So welcome to Ideas and Impact from Trento. So this beautiful city is the third largest city in the Alps, and it was listed in 2020 as the most sustainable city in Italy, according to the Smart City Index. We're here on the final day of the OECD International Conference on SMEs and the Urban Fabric. And I want you to know that the topic of this webinar is of such interest to the three panelists and myself as well, that we're foregoing the opportunity to be joining our colleagues in wine in the wonderful squares outside. And this is Italy, right? So the fact that we're here really means that we care about this topic. And for today's Ideas and Impact, we're going to talk about what's never coming back. And I think it's a really important topic, how the pandemic permanently changed local economic development and what it means for our cities. We'll look at how cities can generate economic growth to move past the pandemic and create sustainable, equitable futures. So I'm pleased to welcome three thought leaders in economic development. All of them have been featured panelists here at the OECD International Conference. First of all, I'd like to introduce Sena Segbedzi. Segbedzi, I thought I had it better than that, Sena. Anyhow, she's coordinator of the OECD's Champion Mayors Initiative for Inclusive Growth. This coalition of mayors prioritizes policies to expand inclusive economic growth in their cities. Previously, Sena was a policy analyst at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy and also worked at the Ford Foundation as program manager of the foundation's initiative for the equitable, inclusive recovery of post-bankruptcy Detroit. And I'm sure she'll have some interesting things to talk about in terms of the parallels in terms of recovery programs. Next, we have Rui Monteiro, who's the director of the Municipal Department of Economics at the Porto City Council. He oversees Invest Porto, the investment promotion agency, the Information and Strategic Studies Office, and the Talent and Promotion of Employability. Rui is also a guest professor at the University of Porto, and he has previously worked in the banking and renewable sector. And then last but not least, of course, all the way home from my home province of BC is Emilie de Rosenroll. Emilie is CEO of South Island Prosperity Partnership in Victoria, and well known to a number of you who will be tuning into the call. and startup CEO of COAST, the Center for Ocean Applied Sustainable Technology. She's passionate about creating value for stakeholders in society, developing unconventional partnerships, like the one that she has with me because we're traveling companions, staying curious and focusing on impact. She has helped create key economic development initiatives for Greater Victoria, including the Rising Economy Task Force and Conference and the Indigenous Prosperity Center. So I think we should kick off by perhaps taking the pulse or the blood pressure of each one of you in terms of your own regions, and maybe you could start and talk about how is your region having just gone through the past 2 years of pandemic, and then after that, basically, if you could start with talking about the biggest shifts you are seeing in economic development in your cities and regions that resulted due to the pandemic. So Sena, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Gerri. Thanks for having me. It's great to be on this panel. So I feel like I'm from two regions, or at least I live in one region, but I grew up in the other. So right now I live in Paris, but I'm from Los Angeles. And I would say that as far as how the pandemic, impacted Paris, the economy really relies on tourism, and that certainly was cut during the height of the pandemic. We also had a very late start into getting back to the normal. It wasn't until I think June 10th in 2021 that we were off curfew, that we were able to go shopping past a different time and to enjoy restaurants and that. So it's really impacted the tourism sector for sure. How we use public space in Paris changed. While we were all sitting at home, the mayor really built out the bike lanes within the city to help mobility in the city. Before the pandemic, there were 2 years of really these gilets jaunes demonstrations that were about the economic inequality that was growing in France, and in particular the big cities. And so that has just translated into now the pandemic and the exacerbation of inequalities and what that means for the people who work and live in the city, and how they move about and grow. So it's been a trying time. The mayor has been speaking about the 15-minute city to make the city, to make services more attainable for the population here. And we'll see how that translates. Hopefully it's about more services, more infrastructure, more jobs, and not about cutting off people, locking them into their neighborhoods, especially if they're not well served or they're not well connected. So we have a lot to learn and see in the next few years in Paris. Yeah.
Thank you, Sena. It's really interesting. When Rui did his presentation at our OECD conference earlier today, after he finished, I sent an email to my husband saying, we must visit Porto immediately, but of course, we'll stop in Paris first. Rui, tell us what's happening in Porto, and what's the general status after the pandemic?
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. So we had some hard times during the pandemic, as everyone, but the city is getting back very well. We have seen again a lot of contacts in terms of FDI, foreign direct investment. So it's very good news for us to see that in terms of foreign direct investment, that was a big source of the economic development of the city. Things are getting back again with some strength. but of course, some things change in terms of the city. So one of the things that we are seeing very clearly that will not go back to the old days is, for example, because we are a small city in terms of space, in terms of geography, is the use of space by businesses. So it's very clear that business are reconsidering in the long term, not just because COVID, how they will use office space. We are going to see a dramatic change on that aspect. And for Porto, this can be a good news because we were very pressured about having office space in the city. So this is not something out of the shelf thing that we can provide to investors. So this, in the long term, can be even beneficial. This change in cultural remote work and so on can be something that Porto can take advantage. In terms of another thing that we are seeing now more related to the municipality and the services that the municipality provides is that during the pandemic, everyone was forced to move very quickly to the online and everything that was administrative. We had a lot of things already being processed through online procedures, but this was augmented in a very rapid way, and now people don't want to get back to the old days. So this was something that was a change through because of the context, but I think it helped us manage more efficiently the services that we provide to the city. I will give you an example, a real case. We have let's say a physical space where everyone can go and take care of business regarding the municipality. Those services could be also accessed through online services, but was a minority. And now I would say maybe 80% of the services required to the municipality are done through the online platform. People don't go to the municipality to take care of things. So this is a very big shift. I would say a good shift because we can now use the time of human resources that were standing by waiting for potential, let's say, clients to arrive to focus on other issues and challenges of the municipality. So I would say that after we are getting back, the numbers are telling us this, and some things inside the, let's say, municipality structure also change for the better, going in the direction of getting things more, even more online that they were previous to the pandemic. So it's taking, like was said in the conference, to use something that was a negative context to get out of it in a better and more efficient way. I think the word efficiency here is very well applied.
Great, good, thank you very much. And Emilie, I guess maybe you could tell us, what do you think are the factors that have had the greatest impact in Victoria, both positive and negative, in post-pandemic or as a result of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I thanks for the question, Gerri. So I think that Victoria, like much of British Columbia, had some of the same types of impacts, and Victoria in particular, very exposed to tourism. So that was an area that got very hard hit. Tourism, transportation, retail, a lot of the bricks and mortar sort of storefronts were very impacted. And then at the same time in Victoria in particular, where second largest sort of tech sector center in British Columbia, we saw a little bit of growth in that area actually. And so depending on the sector within technology, there was actually growth. So the disparity was pretty huge. And then we also saw certain segments of the population too being impacted very differently. So we heard around the world about things like the She Session, where women were being more impacted by the effects of the recession induced by those lockdown measures than were the rest of the population. So that very much was true for Greater Victoria, for the island, for British Columbia and other regions. And then I would also probably want to highlight that the impact on Indigenous communities was also much more serious, much more difficult. And so it sort of, wherever there were fault lines or a sort of lack of access to some of the same types of infrastructure that we come to expect, whether that's social capital or financial capital or physical or digital, that became an even greater difficulty or challenge.
Great. Well, I'm kind of anxious to get to the meat of the topic in terms of what's never coming back, and because I'd really love to dig into what each of you thinks. So, Rui's already given us some examples, but Sena, what is your experience and your intuition tell you? What did we lose in it, or what did we gain so other things are not coming back?
That's a great question. So we have been working over the last 6 years with about 100 mayors from around the world on the topic of inclusive growth. And even before the pandemic, and since pretty much the new urban agenda, every city conference that I've been to, there has been some form of a discussion around inclusion, whether it's social or economic. And I've seen that transfer now talking about it in the recovery sense, right? There's going to be an inclusive, green, and smart recovery. So I'm hoping that what's not coming back is that we don't leave the inclusive behind, and that it really does thread and is the through line in how we think about the development of cities, following the pandemic or following, the kind of the successive crises that we are in. What I'm hoping never comes, I think right now we're living, or we have to accept that we'll be living on two planes, right? The digital world is it's gaining traction. This hybrid kind of living and working it's here, whether it's here to stay, it's definitely here, and we're living it. And I think that we'll have to pay attention to not transferring some of the growth pains and the exclusion models into these new spaces that are being created as a result of the pandemic and in the future. So I'm hoping that there's a real consciousness and a real commitment to inclusion, and that we start just collectively from local to regional to national, playing all our part. I think urban policy is a group assignment now, and I think we understand that, right? Cities were on the front line. We've said that time and time again. Now there's a displaced people crisis that's happening with things happening in Ukraine. And so it's going to be a group assignment to get us all back on track. And hopefully everyone plays their part. So I don't think it's a city, a city that's working in its little bubble anymore. We've seen that doesn't work necessarily. So I think what's never coming back is this individual thinking that we don't impact one another, because we do.
That was great, and I want to come back towards the end and discuss more about this hybrid world that we're living in. That I think is fundamentally brought under the microscope by the pandemic and our response to it. But just to follow up one in a way, because I'm so pleased that people like you are actually working at the forefront of digital inclusion, because as we all know, the digital divide has already created an even greater gap, and it tends to threaten to actually exacerbate as we move online. And I'm wondering, are there any policies? Is there any leadership in this area in terms of digital inclusion in the post-pandemic world, when we think about getting almost, as Rui points out, we're not going back to the office. You know, what does that mean for underrepresented groups or minorities or groups who don't have access? You know, we now have to get our driver's license online. We're not gonna stand in line anymore. What does this mean in terms of digital inclusion? So I think that there's a lot more work to be done. Do you know of anybody that's working in that policy area of digital inclusion?
In the policy area, I mean, we started an initiative around smart cities and inclusive growth about 2 years ago, in particular with the Ministry of Urban Policy in Korea, because they were really interested in trying to develop policies around smart cities already. So there's been some traction there. I'm working on a project now with the City Council of Bilbao that has taken strides to build a smart city strategy and make it as holistic as possible. They call it smart governance, smart people, smart health, and they're trying to embed it in all aspects of the city's development. And in particular, yes, they are looking at the digital divide, or trying to pinpoint who exactly is digitally invisible in the city, how it impacts their access to jobs, how they can get the skill sets to people where they are. So there are a few, I mean, I'm sure there are many, but I think now that people have, since the plane has shifted and the digital world is here to stay, I think perhaps there'll be more investment in the future and trying to make sure that everyone has the basic skills so that they can, participate fully in the economy. But it'll take a little catching up. We all just we just got here a little bit. Yeah.
You're so amazing. You're so optimistic. I am so much more cynical, but it's refreshing to have you here. Emilie, what's never coming back?
Oh, that's a good question. I think to make a little bit of a different angle on this one, I might sort of bring up the area around remote work. So, I think a lot of us have been talking about whether or not we're going to end up going back to the offices and what's the future of office space. And we've heard people talk about just different uses for those buildings and how many of them went vacant. And then now, there were big companies like Shopify with, I think, 10,000 staff, maybe more than that. And they decided they're all virtual. So there's certainly some interesting precedents for types of companies that are not going to go back. And so what are those impacts? But I'm not sure, I guess maybe to play devil's advocate, I think that it might go back a little bit. I think the pendulum has shifted, but the importance of being together and working together, especially where, strategy, culture is strategy, culture eats strategy, as they say. So the importance of being in, around people, depending on what sector you're in, maybe it's less important in some financial sectors or insurance companies, but in areas doing maybe innovative work or creative work, it's vital. So I guess to answer your question is, I'm not sure that it won't go back. So that would be an area that, although people say it's forever changed, it may be not quite as changed as we think. So I do agree, though, with the other panelists that there'll be a certain amount of digital integration as part of our life. Our tolerance for technology being pervasive in our day-to-day life has gone way up, and we've all seen our grandmothers sort of have Zoom accounts and connect with their friends and so on, sort of far-flung areas where they've been able to kind of recreate some sort of social norms in their lives. And then I think the last one would be, but I'd be so interested to hear what the other panelists would say, but something that is probably not going to go back is maybe the sort of insane amount of travel we used to do. And I mean, I saying that from Italy, of course. So I think it's still important to do some traveling. But I think that we used to travel just, for every single internal meeting. And so now, are we going to sort of temper that? Have we sort of become more aware of our carbon footprint as well? And the sort of negative impacts on the environment from traveling quite as much as we used to?
I was going to ask the question, so why don't I ask you, Rui? Is travel coming back? Even though you and I and Emilie have traveled here, and I really want to go to Porto, and I really want to go to Paris. So I think there's pent up demand. There's tremendous pent up demand for all of us after being so constrained for 2 years. But travel from a business perspective and from a meeting perspective, you mentioned earlier that the office space situation has obviously been impacted by the pandemic in terms of I want to spend a bit of time on the workforce. So let's not talk about labor markets and work right at this moment. But and I also want to talk about education, because I have some ideas about that too that I want to probe. But tell us about travel and what else do you think? Well, let's ask this question. What do you think people appreciate more as a result? So that they wish would come back, or they're actually anxious to have back. So what's never coming back? What do you think about travel, and what do people wish would come back?
Yeah, I was mentioning also the issue of time that Emilie mentioned, the efficiency in using time in general, because now we are in Trento, but we decided to have this trip and spent several hours on airplanes, trains, and so on. So I think everyone is going to be much more careful about the decision to move physically to one space to another. Going to a conference, going to a meeting. I can say, for example, prior to COVID-19, it was absolutely common, just to give you an example again of the Portuguese reality, for people to leave in the morning from Porto to Lisbon, 300 kilometers, to have just one meeting, and then get back again to Porto, or vice versa, from Lisbon to Porto and Porto to Lisbon. So 600 kilometers for a 1 or 2 hour meeting, just for a meeting. So this is completely disappeared. Unless the Prime Minister asked me to go on a meeting with him to Lisbon, for sure I will say I will go in person. But I think the traveling and the meetings are going to change dramatically in terms of the most efficient use of time. Regarding leisure, I think it's the opposite. I think people are desperate to engage, to travel, to visit new places, going back to places that they already know. And Porto, on that aspect, I think is very strong because the scale of the city is very good, because people don't want to go to you talk about going to Porto, but you are going to Paris. I understand that. I love Paris also. But I think Porto is excellent because as a good scale is a medium-sized city, and people feel comfortable on that aspect because they can enjoy the full city just walking around. So it's not a big metropolis. So I think in that aspect, small and medium-sized cities in Europe and across the world will have a strong demand in terms of tourism versus some big metropoles like London or even Paris or Barcelona, that are great cities. I'm not saying that, but I think they will need to challenge, are going to be challenged on that aspect. One of the things that we addressed until now, but I think was something that people actually realize that things can actually work differently, is everything that is related to the SDG goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. So when we were able to see everywhere in the world the impact of having very few cars on the road, very few emissions and so on, and I think people realize that this can be achievable. Of course, we are not going to be at home, not to be any kind of emissions. It's not possible, but I think that was a big step in terms of perception that we can actually achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030 and 2050. For example, yesterday Porto was elected as one of 130 cities from the European Union that are going to strive for zero emissions until 2030, a very ambitious goal. I know that I'm a little skeptic also, not of Porto, but how in fact we can achieve these goals. But I think the awareness regarding everything that is related to sustainability have made a huge jump in terms of getting to everyone, not just some part of society. And I think that will help governments and policy at EU level and national level and city level to push for reforms to help us have a more sustainable way of living because we just have one planet. So I think old methods that were being left behind are now completely behind, and now we must engage in policies that for sure need to accelerate this issue of sustainability. I think that is one of the cases that we are not going back. We are not going to start projects that are not already fully aligned with this view that people perceive that is possible to be implemented. And we survived COVID even without getting into cars and so on. So that is a new window that is open, and I think we should all take advantage of it.
That's another optimist that he has no doubt, but we're going to meet our goals. I really do want to ask about education, but I don't think we have time. But I think that unlike remote work, online education, at least in North America, did not fare so well. And there's a lot of discussion about the young people who lost 2 very important years. And I think that we really appreciated the role of in-person learning, and that our technology doesn't support it in the same way as perhaps we are able to work. And so maybe a little later on, some of you might want to jump in on that one. Because I think whereas with work we were able to springboard in terms of our online literacy and levels of comfort, and it has had impact, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Education sort of failed to do the same thing. We could talk about health too. I think healthcare is somewhere, my own opinion, I'm not on this panel, by the way, but I have to give my opinion. I think healthcare is somewhere in between in terms of success of the online experience. So let's now talk about the impact on the labor market, and the fact that there's a growing chorus of businesses and organizations worldwide who are basically saying we can't find workers anymore. There's a mismatch between skill sets for a lot of jobs. There's the fact that folks who have found that they can work online have no intention of going back to the office, even though some organizations are asking their employees to come back to the office, and that generally there's a huge labor shortage. So and it's now a workers market who can basically the in-demand workers can ask for the pay levels they want, the hours they want, the days in the week they want, and companies, SMEs are having to deal with this, and so rising costs, instability of the workforce. So what can regions do? I mean, how do you and how does your particular city region respond to this labor crisis? Why don't you start, Sena? Oh, Emilie, no, I missed you. We'll let you speak first because I missed you out totally this time.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, well, that's the huge obsession right now of our team, is thinking about this issue. I mean, it's the #1 issue cited by our private sector members, the largest employers of the Greater Victoria region. Workforce is the top issue. They're not able to attract the talent they need. We have a highly educated workforce, So on top of having an already, a very constricted or tight labor market where businesses aren't finding enough people, and there's that mismatch that you mentioned, Gerri, of the jobs that are available and the skill sets that we have are often sort of in discord. But right now it's much worse than usual. So some of the sort of exacerbating issues from the pandemic are that we had a lot of people leave the workforce, so exit the workforce, so participation rates went down. That hasn't gone back to normal levels yet. So that, I mean, obviously that is a major compounding problem. The issues on women in the workforce, we have yet to see sort of how that sort of plays out. And some people are sort of imagining that there could be sort of ripple effects downstream, looking at how they try to get back into their career, but did they lose out on certain critical time? So are they going to be able to jump in just as easily as sort of had they just left? I think I saw an article, a headline on that just this morning from McKinsey saying, the women are trying to come back in, but is the sector going to want them? So, I mean, I would suspect in our market, yes, they will, because as you say, there's not enough people. One of the other issues for us, it's a massive issue, is the affordability piece. So Greater Victoria is the third most expensive place in Canada, only to be beaten by Toronto and Vancouver. So we have a housing crisis. We don't have enough houses to meet the demand. So we do have this, well-educated workforce, but we're finding that the next generation, or to try to embrace welcome newcomers, all of this is very, very difficult with the existing problems. So what sort of keeps me up at night is definitely thinking about how, if the affordability issue goes unchecked, it will eventually constrain our economic growth. So at the core of that, that just makes everything more difficult. So making it lower amenity, actually, and that's what we had Dr. Tim Moonen, who I know has done some work with Rui as well from the UK, the Business of Cities, whom Gerri and I got to see in London a few days ago. And he said, he did lots of work with us and said, one of the things that's at stake here is that you become a low amenity, low productivity region that's not very resilient to future shocks. And we had this great image during the OECD conference here of the sort of wave, the wave over top of us of COVID, just being followed by a bigger wave with the recession. And then the last wave being the huge wave that engulfs us all is climate change. And so I think now we would add certainly the Ukrainian-Russian conflict and geopolitical tensions that we did not anticipate, just 2 years ago. The world has changed. So those are some of the things that I guess are sort of front and center for me, and I'm sure for Sena and Rui as well.
Sena, tell us your perspective and what's happening in Paris in terms of the labor. Is there a labor crisis there as well?
So I haven't done much studying. I have read one article, but I don't think it has been extreme as it has been in North America. I think just the labor market in France, or in Paris in particular, was a little less dynamic than what was happening. So I don't think there was such a great resignation, just because of I think the policies that ended up kind of bridging the gap for wages and gave stipends also required people to have a job. So I don't think there was a resignation in that sense. I think you got funds if you already were employed, not if so that probably helped with the mass exodus from the workforce, at least for a period of time. And it's just a little bit more challenging to find jobs, to get in places, because of they have these contracts that are a little bit like we have indefinite contracts and time delimited contracts. And for instance, in a place like Bilbao, 90% of the contracts that were employment contracts in 2019 were time delimited. So it's less, I think it's there was less of this mass exodus that was happening in North America. But I think just in general, this new way of working and thinking about work and what it means in our lives and how it works with the lifestyles we want, especially after 2 years of confinement, will probably make everyone question some of their decisions. And what I'd be interested to see is, does this translate into maybe more entrepreneurship, or people having this boost in wanting to create something of their own to leave their mark, and what this means for the urban fabric? Like, can we move things from the digital space that were created? I don't know if you have Instagram, but I saw all these companies pop up in the last 2 years, and how can we translate some of that dynamism into the city, like bringing it into the city fabric? And I'd be interested in helping that process and helping how cities can develop policies to move what's happening in the digital space into the physical space, and creating some sort of virtuous cycle from all of this.
I've got one more question just before we turn it over to I see there are lots of questions coming in from our audience, which is really gratifying too. And that is in North America, what we're seeing is that the high demand tech workers have realized that they not only can they work anywhere, but they can get paid a lot more if they're working for large companies who will pay them maybe 5 times. I'm talking about American companies in particular, pay them 5 times more or 3 times more than they can make locally. So that is putting even more constraint on our local in North America, our local workforce. But on the other hand, there are also and this is the other side. And since they also know they can live anywhere and work in an urban environment, there's also been movement away from the big cities where there's congestion and pollution and all kinds of stresses to more friendly cities, more cities that are, or even rural communities. So really, which way are you seeing people coming to Porto or leaving Porto? Or are they working from home more? Are they what's the labor? I just want to get a pulse of your labor market, but make it quick because we're going to move over to the to our audience.
Okay, just a number. So our employment rate now is 5.8%, which is very low. Okay, what we are seeing is that in fact people, if they are able, they prefer to be more away from the city center. That is obvious. It's no-brainer. Okay, but I think that if people can work anywhere in the world, why don't work in a city that they love and like? And they can go to the river, and then go surfing in the end of the day by the sea. So Porto, in this case, has some characteristics that can, in fact, attract people that, for example, are working now in central London, and moving to Porto is completely different in terms of quality of life. But someone that works inside Porto, on the region of Porto, probably will go more to the outskirts. So I think it depends a little bit on the initial stage of the centrality of the person that is working. But I can tell you that a friend of mine was hired by a unicorn company, signed a contract, and went for 1 year to Sri Lanka to work. A Portuguese worker. Okay.
Okay. All right. So it's now time to get some questions from our audience. Let's see, where are these questions from the audience? I can't see any questions from the audience. Just a second. My computer now seems to seize up. Emilie, can you take any questions of the audience, because my
no problem.
I can't move my chat.
for sure. I'll jump in here. So we have a great question from Ben Clark from the Delphi Group. He's interested to hear from the panelists about leading economic recovery initiatives from the tourism sector in particular. So I think probably a really good one for Rui, as well as maybe one for myself. And Sena, I'm not sure how close. Actually, I mean, Paris, it was huge impact as well. So maybe you have practices from there or from elsewhere in the OECD you could share. So he just says further, huge disruption in this sector and an opportunity to build back better, especially in terms of incorporating sustainability and greater local economic impact from tourism. So, so in a nutshell, are you seeing a response in terms of tourism recovery strategies, or how tourism's rebounding to include, more of a focus on sustainable development goals or climate or sustainability, or anything like that? First, maybe just whoever, just jump in, Rui or Sena, who would like to answer? It'll be too polite now. Okay, Sena.
I don't know the specific policies that are happening in Paris, but I know sustainable tourism is on the mind, especially we have a unit within the OECD in the Center of Entrepreneurship, SMEs, cities and regions that focuses just on tourism and green tourism, and now more sustainable tourism is certainly on the minds of our OECD country members. As far as certain or specific initiatives, I know Florence, which of course suffered greatly, their tourism sector during lockdown, created this multi-stakeholder fund table to try and think through how they bring back their tourism sector. It's called Rinascimento Firenze, and it involves a lot of the business, like the business sector there, especially their high-end sector, but also kind of the local stakeholders that depended on this. And the other issue is how to create better jobs that are coming out of the tourism sector, which had been, typically a little less stable, a little more volatile, and a little less paid. So I think that's something that's happening, especially in Europe and in the tourism sector, thinking about the quality of jobs within it once it does come back.
Yeah, absolutely. Rui, your thoughts?
Yeah, our tourist numbers are in fact getting back very well, I must say. I think in the case of Porto, the assets remain the same. You have the physical assets of the city, of the architecture, and so on, and then you have the immaterial assets that are the people. And both of them remain in the city. I think the big shift will be that now cities like Porto and other cities, mid-sized and big cities, will become more a hub of tourism than a single destination. So what we are seeing is that people will come to Porto as a hub and, for example, explore the north part of the country. So the tourism, I think, will go through a strategy in this case of the city. This is something that is now being, let's say, analyzed and thought to be position itself more a hub than a focal point. So people can arrive to Porto, on the same day can go to cities like Braga or Guimarães, and then spend 2 or 3 days, then can have dinner in Porto that night and sleep in Porto. So I think this will be more a hub and very focused also in issues of sustainability. Regarding, I think one of the challenges for sure will be human resources on this specific sector. Regarding Gerri comment about talent and the difficulties that we face, and I think in this specific sector in tourism, the issue of human resources and talents will be very difficult to handle. So this is something that should go through not a local municipality policy, but a national policy or even an UE policy, because I think talent is the great challenge of Europe at this stage.
Thank you. So there's clearly a lot of sort of changes in changing trends, and also some changing opportunities that are sort of emerging as well for some areas. So I'm gonna flip this around and now ask a question to Gerri, because Gerri is now on the panel and I'm now the moderator. So I have a question here from the audience that says it's about building back better from SIDA, and that sort of slogan we've heard quite a bit, about generally understanding, you know, the disaster can be a trigger to create more resilience around us, or you know, the notion that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. So Gerri, today on your panel, you talked a lot about digital and green sort of approaches, and a lot of things from the perspective of the BC government on how to rebound. And in fact, I believe that's a similar, wasn't that the same tagline?
It is the same.
Yeah.
It's the same tagline. Absolutely. I wonder who came up with it first. I thought a lot about what does better mean. I mean, and back, build back better. I think one of the things for me, I think for all of us, perhaps the most profound positive impact of the pandemic was the miracle of the vaccine. The fact that that when the pandemic first started, scientists were saying it's going to take years. Do you realize how long it takes to create a vaccine? And the fact that we very quickly, remarkably quickly, miraculously quickly, we had 3 different vaccines that were ready for market, and the rollout, even though it was frustrating for some of us at the beginning when we all wanted it. When you step back and look at what and I can't say the global community did, because we, you know, again, you see the big divide between the developed and the developing world. But the fact that the vaccine was actually created and then distributed suggests that in under times of great crisis, we can work together. And for me, it's all around the collaborative piece. The better means more collaborative. And from that perspective, seeing how the scientists worked together, it wasn't a single group, but they immediately published the genome of the virus, and they started to share information, and the fact that it was the scientific community that came together using digital technologies, again, using those technologies to actually fast track getting to the results. I think that is a wonderful model for us in terms of how we can address the problems that face us. And when I think about the big wave of the climate crisis that's over us, the fact is that we need to respond again in a much more multinational, collaborative way in terms of stakeholders, both locally and as we move up the value chain in terms of all of the stakeholders in all of our ecosystems working together. So I think that for me, better means figuring out how we can better collaborate at every level of our society, and the big challenge is figuring out the governance around all of that. So I think that when I look at innovation and where we really need innovation, and that's in governance governance models for collaboration.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And just to add to this conversation, Sena had another point here, just to add that at the opening speech of the 3rd UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, Shinzo Abe, might be pronouncing that wrong, Prime Minister of Japan, stated the word of build back better sounds like a new concept, but it is common to the Japanese people, coming up from our historical experiences in recovering from disaster and preparing for the future. It has become an important part of the culture of Japan. So maybe that helps us answer where did it actually originate from? Thanks for that, Sena. So do any of the other panelists, Sena or Rui, do you want to pick up on any of the themes that Gerri brought up here around the notion of what it means to either innovate across, governance? We heard a lot about that over the last few years, few days. Didn't feel like years, I promise. I'm just a little tired. Sort of, what do we need? I know Rui talked about those 5 T's. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I just wanted to get back to one issue that Gerri mentioned, I think it's I think we should be very alert. That is the issue of digital inclusion. I think we are moving very fast, but we cannot leave anyone behind. And I will give you an example of my parents. So if they have a problem with the cable TV, when they call the support line, they say, you should go to the website and do this and that and update this and that. And my parents have 75 years old, and they are not able to keep up with this issue. So I think the issue of digital inclusion, in terms of, and we in Europe we see a lot of the demographic is very clear in terms of an inverted pyramid. Even Elon Musk says that this is one of the big challenges of humanity is the issue of demographics. But I think the issue of digital inclusion, I must agree with Gerri, I think it's something that can go very wrong if we start to push for very quick changes and people get behind. I can relate also to that regarding teaching, because I'm invited professor at university, and it's clear the difference between having classes fully online and have the students in the classroom. It's completely different. I would say in my personal experience, it's the rapport that you have online versus in person. The students prefer very much the in-person interaction versus the online system. And what we are seeing in teaching is that for economy of scales and efficiency issues, many schools are pushing for online. But I think we must be careful, otherwise we get a college degree without leaving our room and our desk. And I think we should pay attention to this issue of getting the right balance, number one, and number two, be careful about the speed of what we are making things and see if we are not getting anyone behind. I think that is a very significant risk that we can take. That's it for now.
Thank you. Well, we had a couple questions that were still, we weren't able to get to them right now because we're running a little bit low on time, but there were some, I just want to highlight, there are some great questions and interest around discussing further the sort of digital nomads, the situation with this really hypermobile workforce, and what does that mean? A really great question. We should explore it on a future ideas and impact. And then also how we need innovation in housing, which we absolutely do. Another great topic for at least one, maybe several more ideas and impact. And with that, I would like to pass it back over to our original, the authentic moderator of the room. Back over to you, Gerri.
I'm the fake moderator. I really want to thank each one of the panelists, Rui and Sena and Emilie, for the great commentary you provided today. I found it very inspiring. I'm really glad that this session was being recorded, because I think it's of interest to a much wider audience. And I think the folks behind the panel and putting it together, I want to thank you too for making sure that it went off without a hitch. And see you next time. Sign off.